We've got two members of our CBP committee here today and a special guest, and we're going to do intros in a second. And today, well, first, I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm C4's executive director, and today we're going to be talking about the Lightning Network and Bitcoin payments using the Lightning Network. So we've got two members of our committee today. Rodney, do you want to start as you are our new CBP chair?
Sure. I am Rodney McInnes. I am the CRO and AML Compliance Ninja at Outlier Compliance Group. We are a boutique consulting firm primarily focused on compliance in Canada. And as Jessica said, I am now currently the chair of the CBP committee, which is exciting and terrifying all at the same time.
Oh, it's great. You've been on the committee for 5 years and you've been amazing. So I think it's a good shift, especially so that Dirk is able to spend more time on the CCSS steering committee. So Dirk, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Dirk Anderson. I'm the founder of Imagine Crypto, and also, as Jess said, in addition to being on the CBP committee, I am on the Cryptocurrency Security Standard Committee.
Awesome. And we have a special guest today, Hannah from Lightning Labs. Hannah, do you want to do a quick intro for people who are watching, maybe not familiar with your work?
Yeah, my name's Hannah Rosenberg. I'm a developer advocate at Lightning Labs. So that means basically it's my job to help developers who are thinking about building on Lightning, to help them get familiar with the tech and help them deal with any issues they may come across. So I do a lot of educational sort of stuff, and I've been in Bitcoin in that space for quite a while now. I've known some of these humans for many, many years. So I've done lots of different things, but that's what I'm currently doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I was thinking about this before. Fun fact, Hannah and I used to work together on a different education project, which I was thinking, I was like, when was that? Seems like forever ago. So it's kind of fun to be on a call with you again. It's been a while.
It is. Yeah.
So let's talk about Lightning. And before we get into the Lightning Network, maybe we can just talk about Bitcoin payments in general and a little bit about usage and inefficiencies and why we even got to the point where we needed to talk about something like the Lightning Network. So why don't we talk about how Bitcoin in general is currently being used for payments? Hannah, do you want to start?
Yeah. So, this gets into an interesting conversation, right? Conversation I was having with a friend just the other day. What is Bitcoin, right? Is it a store of value? Is it for investment? Is it digital money, right? Is it digital cash? If you could read the fine print on that paper behind Dirk there, right, you would see it's referred to as, cash money for the internet, right? But there's a lot of debate and discussion about what Bitcoin is or should be, but certainly it started as envisioned as a payment mechanism, right? As money for the internet. And it very much is used that way today, although it is also very much used for investment and all kinds of other various different applications. But blockchain technology, and I'll go ahead and assume that most people watching this are already familiar roughly with how that works and consensus mechanisms and decentralization and all of that good stuff, which is amazing. And the decentralization is what makes Bitcoin run and it's what made it survive as far as it has. And that's beautiful, but it's also expensive and terribly inefficient and all of these other things. So if you're someone who wants to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange more than a store of value, then using Bitcoin on-chain, right, an on-chain transaction is quite expensive, right, or can be, right? If you're going to buy a morning cup of coffee, you definitely don't want to, pay I'm not sure what the transaction fees are at the moment. They've been low lately, but, most of us will remember, right, when transaction fees have at times gotten very high, and you're certainly not going to buy a, $4 cup of coffee and pay a $5 transaction fee, right? That does not make much sense. So
that definitely impacts the medium of exchange piece, because if the value is going up, store value, good. But if you can't use it, it's Also, as somebody who loves Bitcoin, it's pretty disappointing when you want to go and use it and the exchange or the transaction fee is as much as it would cost for whatever you're buying. It kind of
Yeah,
negates the purpose of it for sure.
it does. Yeah. So I mean, if you want to buy a car, right, it might still make sense to do so on chain, but for that cup of coffee, or to stream some music or something, like it doesn't make a lot of sense to do on chain. So this is kind of the birth of Lightning, right? This is where Lightning comes out of this particular issue and this the scaling constraints of Bitcoin. So if you want, we can talk a little bit about what exactly the scaling constraints of Bitcoin are.
Yeah, before we jump into that, Rodney or Dirk, do you want to add anything about Bitcoin payments in general and kind of the usage of it up until now, which, well, I guess not now, but more recent years, Lightning has started to become away from micropayments. But anything you want to jump in about with using Bitcoin for payments in general?
Like one of the elements that I always have people ask me about is the 10-minute confirmation times, or the approximate 10-minute confirmation times. Is for a cup of coffee, I would probably take a $4 risk that confirmation is good, is forthcoming at some point, versus a, to Hannah's example of a car, which I'm going to assume is a Lambo in this instance.
Of course,
is you're good. Yeah, absolutely.
What else would it be?
That you're waiting, the 6 confirmations, as we talk about in the test questions and the training materials, as the, kind of the absolute kind of threshold of a confirmation. So one of the elements when you're looking at smaller transactions is how risky are you willing to be to wait for that, confidence in the confirmation.
Yeah,
Yep.
imagine waiting in the Starbucks drive-through lane and everybody in front of you has to wait 10 minutes before you can go on. That would be hugely problematic in terms of adopting.
It would make for some great video clips for YouTube at some point, I'm sure. But yeah.
I would be frustrated if it was the person in front of me. When it's my turn, I would be less concerned.
There'd have to be a lot of paying it backwards in that line.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Well, Dirk, was there anything you wanted to say about that before we went into the scaling piece?
No, I think that's the key thing, right? I mean, there's just obviously some, as much as we love Bitcoin, there's obviously some friction in using it for, low value and timely transactions. And so that's what I'm interested in hearing Hannah chat about.
Yeah, and like as people who really love Bitcoin and the technology, I think it would behoove all of us if we pretended like everything was perfect, right? Like we need to acknowledge that things could be better and where they could be better in order for the technology to be really what it is and can be. And so that's why we need to talk about scaling and take a look at what those inefficiencies are and issues and find resolutions to that. And that's where people that are developers come into play, because someone like me can talk about it, but I'm not able to actually create these solutions. So Hannah, do you want to explain a little bit about why layer 2s were introduced and Lightning in general?
Absolutely. Yeah. So their layer 2s came about because we want to have the decentralization that Bitcoin gives us. It's entirely necessary to how it functions and its censorship resistance and all of that good stuff. But we also want to get our coffee straight away, right? So how do we do all of these things? Well, I'll talk briefly about why Bitcoin is not good for buying a cup of coffee, right? So it's if I went to buy a cup of coffee using an on-chain transaction, right? Everyone in the global Bitcoin network needs to know about that and needs to validate that transaction, right? Everyone needs to know about everything, which is totally necessary for the consensus, but is a little bit inefficient for buying a cup of coffee. So if we have a world where everyone tries to buy their cup of coffee on chain, then we run up against some constraints. And we tend to always think about this in transactions per second, right? How many transactions per second can we shove into the blockchain so that everyone can get their cup of coffee using Bitcoin, right? And that's definitely a constraint because there's only so much space in a block right? And we've spent many, many years arguing about that, but right now there's only so much space in a block, right? So we can only shove so much data. You only get so many transactions per second. So that's the very famous scaling constraint, but there are two others I like to think about as well. Another one is blockchain bloat. So just the sheer size of the blockchain, right? And how much data you can put in there and how that impacts who can run a full node and where and how you can run a full node. And then the other one is just data transmission. If we actually tried to get global consensus on everyone's morning cup of coffee, we would have a hard time just sharing all of that information all around the globe. So those are as I see it, three big issues with Bitcoin scaling, and also why I love Lightning, because while there are many different and over the years been proposed all kinds of different scaling solutions, I like Lightning because it solves all three of those, right? When you move funds into the Lightning network and when you're transacting on the Lightning network, not everyone needs to know about everything, right? That doesn't have to get confirmed. My morning cup of coffee purchase does not have to get confirmed on the Bitcoin blockchain. So it solves that transactions per second thing, because we're not trying to shove that coffee transaction into the blockchain. That data transmission doesn't have to go to everyone in the global network. And as only, a channel opening and a channel closing transaction actually makes it into a blockchain, then that my cup of coffee transaction is highly unlikely to actually ever get into the blockchain itself. And so that does not cause blockchain bloat, right? So that's my pitch on, what's the scaling issues with Bitcoin and why I'm a big fan of Lightning is because it solves all three of those big issues. Yeah.
I was thinking while you're explaining it, first of all, I think that's really helpful to put it into those three different categories. Also, I think we've said coffee like 50 times since we've started, and I made some right before this stream, and I'm very pleased with my decision because now I definitely want some. What else do we want to add about, I guess, the blockchain bloat, the issue with getting all of these transactions into blocks and how this new technology helps us? Rodney or Dirk, did you have anything you wanted to add to what Hannah said?
I would just say, I think it's particularly pertinent with some of the other changes and use cases that we're seeing with Bitcoin, with the addition of trying to kind of build additional data stores into the Bitcoin blockchain, creating bloat all on their own, right? Potentially, obviously, streamlining the payment, the necessary data for the payments makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the perks of an open ledger is you can put whatever you want on it. So that is
whatever you want, you just got to pay for it, right? And that's another sort of perspective on this. I tend to think of space in a public blockchain as a scarce and valuable resource. And so it probably should be expensive, right? Too expensive for me to, make sense to, again, buy a cup of coffee with it. Well, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't so we've addressed what the overall issue is and why Bitcoin works for large purchases, but it's problematic for smaller payments that we might want to make if we're in a hurry, or we don't want to wait or we don't want to spend as much for transaction fees, all of these things. So obviously, Hannah, you're here to talk with us about a solution that the Bitcoin community has been working on and towards and continues to develop, which is the Lightning Network. And so do we want to talk about what that is and how it is part of Bitcoin, but it's not in Bitcoin? Like, I think there's some confusion. Like, is it a side chain? No, it's a layer. What is a layer? Should we back up and just kind of explain what that is for anyone who doesn't understand the terminology?
Absolutely. And do you want to hear my, so I think what is a layer 2 is kind of a hot topic at the moment. Do you want to hear my personal definition of an L2?
Yes,
okay.
I'd love to.
Please.
Cool. All right. So this is, I have to credit Peter Todd because I sort of borrowed his definition. It's not his exactly, but it's heavily inspired by his definition. All right, so I'd say an L2 is a system that allows for transactions to happen more often than the number of on-chain transactions in such a way that no entity is able to profitably steal the funds, and owners of the funds are able to unilaterally withdraw their funds. So that sounds very technical. So we'll make it a little bit more consumable, right? And L2, I would say, is any mechanism that allows a whole bunch of transactions to happen that, don't require that global state, right? Don't require that global sharing of information. So a whole bunch of transactions can happen with that much more local knowledge. But they can happen in such a way that, it's not, doesn't make sense for someone to try and cheat you, right? It's secure, right? It goes back and uses the Bitcoin main chain as its form of security. And then the really the technically important part is when we talk about unilateral withdrawal of funds. Basically means I can move my funds into an L2, right? And put them there, and then I can move them out whenever I want. So I'm not waiting on someone else to approve that moving out of funds. All right. So that's a very specific definition. And I want to note that, this sort of a topic of debate lately. So I think it's important to define it and define it very clearly. I think there are a lot of things that are going around that use the term second layer or L2, right? That don't meet with my personal definition of what an L2 is, but that I think are perfectly interesting and valid projects or experiments. I just think that most of them are side chains, right? And so the difference in my head, right, between an L2 and a side chain is that generally a side chain is sort of similar, maybe from a user perspective, where I'm like, okay, I have this Bitcoin and then I'm going to move it into sort of this other system, right? It's kind of like you would with the Lightning Network. I have it on chain, I'm going to move it into the Lightning Network. It's like, okay, I have it on chain, I'm going to move it into a side chain. But there are two big differences, is that a side chain is going to function like its own separate blockchain and have its own sort of consensus mechanism, right? There is no consensus mechanism in Lightning because it is not, it's not a blockchain. There's not like a global state really. And we can talk a little bit about exactly how Lightning works and why that's the case. But a side chain generally is like, here's Bitcoin, here's the main chain, and then here's my cool little side chain. And I might have a different consensus mechanism than I do with Bitcoin. Perhaps it's just a federation signing blocks, right, as opposed to proof of work, right? But it's its own sort of consensus algorithm running here. And then you have to go back and forth. There's like a bridge, or you lock funds into the side chain and go back. And generally speaking, there's not unilateral withdrawal. Like there's some sort of federation that has to sign off on that to move funds back over. So I've got no issues with side chains. I just think that technically they're very different things from an L2.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it, because when you say side chain, maybe the key there is the word chain. It's still chaining blocks together, and it still needs to have consensus versus a layer, which is, we know, layering on top of something, meaning it still needs the main chain in order to be able to function. So Lightning Network doesn't exist without the Bitcoin network, right?
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
And do we want to talk a little bit about how Lightning works, like what a channel is and all of that? And I have pretty pictures if we want to look at pretty pictures.
I think we absolutely should. And I think that some of the different terminology here is really helpful to understand. So I would love to see some pretty pictures.
All right.
Dirk, were you going to say something too?
I was going to say, maybe I can kind of cue you up for that, or maybe I'll just say something here that you'll ignore, which is fine as well. People tend to get a little annoyed when I use traditional finance to try and, present analogies for people to understand, but I'm going to do it anyways. One thing you hear a lot of times with Lightning is that it's kind of like credit cards and banking sort of thing, right? Like it operates as a at a kind of a transaction level, and then you kind of have this whole banking settlement on the back end with the Bitcoin blockchain sort of thing. Is that a fair way of thinking about it? And then maybe that also kind of like sets you up for explaining how that actually kind of works on the back.
Well, we say like all analogies are wrong, but some of them are very helpful, right? I think that one's if someone comes from that background, that could be very helpful. Sometimes I also tell people like it's a difference between like having a savings account and a checking account, right? And like on chain's more like savings, and then your checking account's more like Lightning. But yep, I think if that's a helpful analogy. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing with analogies. We start to understand through different frameworks that we already can grasp. And then as we build those analogies together, we begin to then understand more and more clearly the actual project or technology that we're trying to understand. But in order to really get there, we need other frames of reference to build that until we can get that clear picture. So I would say it is helpful, Dirk.
Hannah, have you ever told your thoughts on analogies to Andreas?
I don't know. I can't remember when I formed that particular. I definitely stole that line from someone, but I can't remember who.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. I will share my screen and show you the pretty pictures that show us how Lightning works.
Yes, please.
Oh.
And as Hannah's doing that, I'm just going to clarify the joke that Rodney just said. Andreas Antonopoulos, who does a lot of analogies and whatnot, he is one of the board members for C4, and Hannah and I have both worked with him as well. So
Yep.
that's kind of the connection.
And also one of
there.
the authors of the Lightning, right?
Yeah,
Lightning
helpful.
book.
I'm
the Master of the Lightning Network.
I'm getting an error when I try and share. Perhaps it's a permission issue.
Let me check.
Okay.
You should be able to share. Let's see. Is it not working still? Try again.
Oh, it might be something on my computer. Because of course I am running a Linux machine and sometimes they don't like to play nice with other things.
No comment on using Linux.
So I might have had to install some sort of something. Although I swear I've done this share before. It's okay. We can explain without the pretty pictures. I will.
And you know what? We can then later create snippets where we use the pictures to show it in a later video. So you can just talk through them, if that works.
Awesome. Okay. So the first thing that we want to think about is moving funds, like say, okay, I have some Bitcoin, but I want to go use it for a cup of coffee or for streaming music or whatever I want to do, right? And so I'm going to move those funds into a Lightning wallet. Technically, what's happening is, let's imagine that me and Jessica are setting up a Lightning channel, right? Jessica runs a music streaming service, and I want to, listen to her awesome techno beats, right? And so
are you trying to get me to start singing? Is that what's happening here?
Maybe.
No? All right, keep going.
So I'm going to open a Lightning channel, right, with her service, right? So I take funds, and from a technical perspective, this is a 2 of 2 multi-sig, right? I move funds into a 2 of 2 multi-sig address. But from a non-technical perspective, you can think of it as kind of like locking it in a joint account, right? Jessica has a key, I have a key. Either one of us can move our funds out whenever we like, but we sort of lock funds into sort of like an escrow, like this little joint account that we have together. And let's say I open the channel, and when I open it, I have the equivalent of like $100 on my side of the channel, right? I put funds in, all $100 of those funds currently belong to me, right? As Jessica is singing some beautiful tunes, I'm streaming her payments, sats per second, to listen to this fabulous music. And let's say over the course of 20 minutes, as I'm walking the dog, I'm listening to these fabulous tunes, I send Jessica the equivalent of about $20, right? And then, because you're so fabulous, this is excellent music, we're going to pay you $20, $1 a minute, right? Okay, so at the end of this streaming session, right, we've done a whole bunch of Lightning transactions, and we sort of have a new balance, right? Now, $20 of the funds in that channel belong to Jessica, and the other 80 belong to me. And what's important to note here is that these are real Bitcoin transactions, which can be used and settled on the Bitcoin blockchain at any time. So let's say we go and we do this, and then all of a sudden I realize I need to go buy a Lambo, right? So I'm going to have to close this Lightning channel and go spend my money on chain, right? And so I can at any time just take these signed Bitcoin transactions. I've got a Bitcoin transaction with Jessica's signature on it that says, hey, $20 in this channel is mine, but the other 80 is yours. So I can just take that, add my signature to it, bring it to the blockchain, settle, done, right? So that's a Lightning channel. So I can But let's imagine I want to keep listening to this fabulous music, so I keep this channel open. And what we're doing is updating the balance between me and Jessica on this channel. And then let's go back to coffee. Let's imagine that Dirk owns a coffee shop down the street and is accepting Lightning payments, right? And so I have this one channel, and I have this one channel on the Lightning Network with Jessica, but then I really want a cup of coffee the next morning because I had way too much wine jamming out to Jessica's fabulous tunes, and I need a cup of coffee in the morning. So I go to Dirk's Cafe, right? And I say, okay, please give me, a grande, Americano, right? Whatever it is, right? I really need some caffeine. Here's your Lightning payment. The question that commonly comes up is, how can I then pay Dirk if I have a channel with Jessica, right? How does that work? Do I have to open a channel with Dirk too? And maybe I don't want to do that because, I don't know when I'm going to drink that much wine again and need another cup of coffee from Dirk's Cafe in the morning, right? So what we can do is called routing on the Lightning Network. So we'll imagine that Jessica's service is a very popular one. So she has lots of channels with lots of different people. And she also has a channel with Dirk. It's kind of a simplified example. In reality, there'd be more hops. Quite likely there'd be more hops. But we can imagine that I have a channel with Jessica. Jessica has a channel with Dirk. So what I will do is, what my wallet will do is Dirk will present me with a QR code, which is a Lightning invoice, right? And I will scan it to go and pay it. And my wallet will say, hey, I have this channel and I have money in it, so we're good, but how do I find a route through to Dirk? And it's going to send money to Jessica, update my balance on the channel with her. And then in exchange for that, she's going to forward Dirk the money. Right? So she'll update her balance with Dirk. And then there's lots of fancy cryptography and math and stuff that goes on here, such that Jessica can't run off with the money. If Dirk doesn't get it, no one's getting it, right? So we solve all those problems with, penalty clauses and fancy math and all that good stuff. But also Jessica will get a tiny, tiny little fraction of a penny for her efforts, for her kindness in forwarding my payments to Dirk, right? So she is incentivized to do this. Dirk gets his sats, I get my coffee, I can still stream my music. I didn't have to open 2 channels, I can just keep my one. Everyone wins, right? So that's the very, very basics of what is a channel and what is routing on the Lightning Network. An important thing to note there is that so far in this example, we've had one on-chain transaction, which is when I opened the channel to Jessica. Then we had lots of transactions between us, which were not on chain. And then I routed a payment through to Dirk, which is also does not go on chain until one of the 3 of us closes one of those channels.
So that was really great. I hope others could visualize it like I could in there. But so I guess the takeaways are opening and closing channels is how things are reconciled on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Correct.
Okay. Is that the right word that we would use? Reconciled? What's the term?
It's not really reconciled because something is final and done, right? A Lightning payment is final, it's settled without having to go onto the blockchain. But things are recorded on the blockchain really when you need to sort of change the topology of the Lightning Network, when we want to open or close the channel.
Okay.
But things are done and settled once you have that updated transaction from me.
And if I could just quickly, and then I want to go back this, but I just want to quickly say, I think a lot of people that are I know this is Bitcoin, but a lot of people who use Ethereum blockchain or talk about it, they talk a lot about layer 2s and different ways to do this. And one of the really important pieces, I think, of what Hannah said is that this is actually done. When it's on the Lightning Network, it's done. It's not like some other type of, I'm not going to get into the terms, but basically there are different ways that things aren't automatically done and finished on other chains and other layers. And this is a distinction where it can't then be like, oh, actually, I don't think so. Once it's done and it's added to the chain. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to point out is this idea of incentives and incentivizing people in order to participate in it, because I think people might think, well, why would I do this? Why would I participate in something where there's a chance, even though there really isn't, because we talked about math and cryptography, but for it to get stuck or to not go through, and you're involving yourself in it. And that's where you get a small reward, or you're incentivized to be a part of this onion routing system.
Yeah. Yeah. And really the reward or the incentive is also just to encourage people to put funds on Lightning, and then sort of use the term liquidity, right? Which is kind of a financial term as well in some cases, right? But it's just, you have money and you put it in these channels. And this helps the network, right? So if you agree to move some funds from this channel to this channel, you're moving those funds around and you get rewarded for, your willingness to facilitate that movement.
Yeah, it's like if you were in line at a coffee shop and the person in the back, or actually, when you go to like a baseball game or something and you're passing money along to get to the vendor at the end of, for the hot dog or whatever that gets passed back, it'd be like when you're taking that money, you also get just a small little piece for your time to pass it along, right? So they don't do that at baseball games, but maybe we should start to do that. But
love that idea.
then, pardon me? Oh, you
I
love
love that idea.
Rich. Yeah, but so it's the idea of this community working together, and it's insured or incentivized by using these small fees that people are getting to encourage them to continue to do this.
Yep.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay. All right. That was good. Any other additions or comments, Dirk or Rodney, about what she just said or went through? I feel like I'm talking too much, but I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, I guess it's not specifically about that, but it's related to that, right? And I think this is the, again, where those of us who might be, pretty hardcore Bitcoin fans, but try understanding that maybe we can just talk a little bit more about how Lightning, keeps the transaction secure and how it interacts or how it leverages the Bitcoin blockchain and the consensus model. For those, for those transactions, especially as it's routing them, kind of to other people off the actual Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, sure. We could dive into that a bit. And we'll start sort of with just kind of an analogy, right? It's like the Bitcoin main layer is kind of like, if you have some sort of dispute, you go and settle it on the main layer, right? So the dispute you might run into is, different scenarios. Like imagine someone trying to broadcast an old transaction, right? An old state of a channel, right? Someone might try and do that. And then I could just show up to the blockchain and be like, no, here's my cryptographic proof that they're wrong. Now I get to penalize them, right? So that's one way that happens. There's actually some cool math stuff with hashing that happens. So if we imagine that transaction that got routed through Jessica to Dirk, what would happen is that he would sort of create this secret, right? That is encapsulated in the payment that I make, right? And the only way Jessica can claim her funds is if she reveals the secret, right? And if she reveals the secret, then I can claim funds. You know what I mean? Like it's that chain gets pulled back through is kind of how it works in my head. But there's
no, that makes sense. It needs to be connected in some way, and math does that. And so these hashing algorithms do it for us so that we're not actually having to do something, right? It's like it's done with math.
And so you can't settle that until you have the secret, right? And if one person has the secret and tries to settle something without the other person's participation, the secret becomes public and then everyone can see it, right? So this is how this cool math sort of prevents someone in the middle from running off with your funds while you do this.
And if I may, if you're at this baseball game and they're passing money along and you take the $5 and stick it in your pocket, you're going to also have some type of penalty for doing that, right? It's probably not going to go so great if somebody sees you stealing this money. It's the same kind of thing, but it's done with math, and you're probably not going to get smacked in the face in the same.
It's even kind of cooler with that analogy. If you just try to hold on to the $5, the $5 disappears.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't love that idea, but that's cool how it happens, and that it's all done like people often say blockchains are magic. It's not magic, it's math and computer science, but I think that's a good way to visualize it. You think you're going to get something and then there's no way to actually keep it because the code has been created to make sure that you can't.
It's all very David Copperfield.
There you go. Nice. But yeah, and then we can get super duper technical and talk about, you know, HTLCs and different types of penalizing scripts and time locks and all that good stuff. But that's, you know, that's the basics of how that security mechanism works.
And well, I don't think we need to get into that, but the idea is that there are mechanisms that can prevent these things from happening. Like there are time locks, there are different things that can be built into it or that are built into it to make sure that it's done in a way that actually works. Because if it's a layer that, if the layer 2 doesn't actually work, then it's not solving any of the scaling issues that we talked about at the beginning, right?
Yep. Exactly.
I also want to say one other thing. I was talking to somebody recently in a training, and they brought up the fact that there's all these different terms that we use. Like we'll say main, the Bitcoin main chain or main net, or like, you know, we already explained side chain, but then also layers. But so when we say Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain, the main net, we're talking about the same things for the course of this discussion. We're talking about the same things. And so when we say Lightning or Lightning Network or layer 2 in reference to Lightning Network, those are all the same things built up on kind of on top of that chain. That's that layered piece, right?
Yep.
Okay. I recently realized that those of us that understand the tech use similar but different terms to explain the same things. So we're not saying the same words over and over again, but then others are like, is that a different thing or not? And I think it's just like after you've heard it for a while, you start to get used to it. But I just wanted to point that out since it was addressed in a session that I had recently. Okay, so let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Should we start talking about how you go from main net to layer 2 and what you would do? Like, how would I even open a channel? Do I need to open a channel if I want to get on? Yeah, so how would I go about doing that?
So you would get yourself some kind of wallet, right? A Lightning enabled wallet. And there are many wallets that will allow you to do on-chain and Lightning at the same time, right? But you would definitely need some sort of application, right? Some sort of wallets. Now I'm a nerd that plays with code all day, so I primarily use one that's like on a Ubuntu server, you know, right? But if you don't want to do that, then you would just and there's plenty of them out there, you know, for Android and iPhone. You would download a wallet onto your mobile phone. And then you would have to have some Bitcoin to send to that wallet, right? So you would get some Bitcoin address, and then you would send Bitcoin to that address there, or import a seed that has funds on it, something of that variety. But you need the application, you need the Bitcoin, then you would open a channel. Now, so definitely opening a channel has to happen, right, in order to join the larger network. But a lot of wallets are really just incredibly clever at hiding that away from people, right? So that you don't even, because you know, if you want, you know, someone who isn't a tech nerd to use this technology, you don't want them to ever even hear the word channel and liquidity, and certainly never HTLC or any of this, like, you know, like any of this stuff, right? A lot of these wallets are very, very good at having funds on chain, but sometimes they'll open a channel for you, right, as you go to make a payment, right? So they'll kind of hide it behind the scenes. So maybe you'll just have funds on chain. And that's like it's a non-custodial wallet, like you're holding the keys. And then as you go to make a payment, they'll kind of, you know, facilitate the opening of that channel, right? And probably with their node, and then they'll connect you to the broader network. Right. So that's a very common construction, but you definitely have to open a channel at some point, but a lot of times that's abstracted away for you. So you don't have to worry about it.
Well, and this is kind of like, I mean, we think about when Bitcoin first started and how difficult it was to keep track of private keys and seed phrases. And then, what was it, BIP 39 that came along? And now we are able to do this in a much less cumbersome way. It's the same sort of thing as the technology advances. We're able to do things easier. And those of us who are less technical are able to do the same things that the more technical people are able to do, but without going through all of the steps that, we don't fully understand and could potentially make risky accidental decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not even just like if you don't understand it, it's just like the more detailed stuff you have to, even if you do know what you're doing, the odds of you just smashing the wrong button are just,
Oh, yeah, for
nerve-wrackingly
sure.
high. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And kind of along those lines, you mentioned it's a non-custodial wallet. We spent a lot of time talking about custodial versus non-custodial wallets in the Bitcoin world, and have done whole shows on that. Is there a case for or use for non or for custodial wallets in with Lightning, or is that kind of just not a necessary thing? And how are they different or the same from custodial versus non-custodial just in traditional Bitcoin?
So doing things in a custodial fashion is easier, right? It's easier for an application developer who doesn't have to then figure out how to run channels behind the scenes and get things just in time. It doesn't have to worry about the opening transaction, the closing, all kinds of little technical things. If I open the channel when the fee rate is this, but then I have to close it later when the fee rate is that, and how do I, it's like gets very technical and specific. So there are plenty of custodial Lightning wallets available out there, and a lot of times they're just easier for wallet application builders to build, right? They're easier to manage. And then it is a challenge to abstract away the complexities of Lightning. And when it's custodial, it's much easier to abstract that away, right? So I think there's an ease in building. It's easier to build custodial stuff, and it's easier to make a user-friendly interface with custodial stuff. And so generally for ease is why you wind up seeing that on Lightning. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, so, do we want to start talking about use cases a bit more, or is there anything else we feel like we should talk about in terms of like the transitions from Bitcoin's main chain to layer 2? Did we miss anything yet, or should we start talking about how this is being used? We feel ready to move on, or is there anything else you want to bring up, Hannah, that
I don't have anything else to bring up on that one, so unless any of y'all do. Yeah.
My
No, I
only
Rodney.
question, which may be like too deep, was when I first started playing with Lightning, was the struggles with channel capacity. Is there a possibility that we could kind of shed some light on that element of it, but also, again, without getting too deep into the weeds on things?
Yeah. Channel, so this goes back to the liquidity issue, right? So channel capacity, and it might be that I opened a channel in our example we were using with Jessica's music streaming service, and I only put $100 in there. And then I'm just so in love with her music. After a week, I've spent all $100 in there, right?
how could you not be?
How could I not be, right? So I ran out of funds in this channel, right? And it's just kind of what you're talking about, Rodney, like I don't like, how do I add more funds to that channel? How do I rebalance things?
Yes, and also, so without, and maybe this was user error more than anything else. What happened is I was trying to buy something online. It was $10, and I was having trouble getting, I couldn't open a direct channel. So the routing struggles I was having kept giving me errors because there wasn't enough channel capacity. And that might have been on my end or someone else's.
It could have been a number of different things, but I'll tell you about so I imagine this happened a few years ago, right? This is a few years back, right? And this stuff really progresses very quickly. So we have so many, that was definitely a big issue. So we call it more like liquidity issues, but it's be like, you ran out of capacity in your channel. It's probably like the error you were getting, right? So let's imagine that I do exactly that. Let's imagine that I have spent like all but like $5 in my channel with Jessica. But because I'm such a music fan, I also have 3 other channels set up with other music services, but they all have like $10, $5, $8, right? Because I've just spent all of my Satoshis streaming this fabulous music, right? Now, if I go to make a payment, let's say I'm trying to buy a new charger for my laptop and it costs $20 and I'm buying it from Rodney's online store, right? And I try and use, let's say I try and goes through a channel. If I only had that channel with Jessica, it's going to say, hey, you don't have any more funds there, right? You're sorry, we can't put that payment through. You don't have the $20 to buy that charger for your computer, right? But so there's a number of different solutions to this now. So there are liquidity services that you could use, right, to sort of change the balance in that channel. Be like, hey, I want to refill this channel, so I have a full $100 in there again, but I only have $5 now. I'm going to send this service $95 on chain, and they're going to push a $95 Lightning payment back over to me, such to rebalance my channel, right? So that's a liquidity service, right? That can do that for you. And of course, they'll get a small fee for doing that as well, right? There's also another cool thing called multi-path payments, right? So if I have like 3 different channels that each have $10 in them, but I want to pay you $20, like I could send out payments via different channels that all arrive to you at the same time, right? Or get compiled. And then again, we use fancy math, so you can't have one of those fractions lost somewhere. So I can send out payments via different channels and have it all come back to you. And then there's different mechanisms in the works to try and actually change channel capacity, and that's down the road. But there's like all kinds of really cool solutions now, such that if you have a well-managed node, right? If you're a big nerd like me, you have all kinds of automations set up, little Python scripts, doing all kinds of things in the background to avoid that scenario, right? Or you can there are all kinds of services you can use which to set up automations and to manage that situation, or you can use multi-path payments. Like there's just a plethora of options these days to manage that exact scenario. So it all just happens in a script in the background.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
This may be my ignorance on the topic, but channel capacity increasing, so liquidity increasing. So you've got the $100 channel open with Jessica, but Jessica's offering a meet and greet for $1,000, and you're like, I would pay $1,000 to meet Jessica. Would you have to?
Yes.
Oh, obviously. Would you open, or would you have to open a new channel that has, like, say you don't have the multi-channel option, would you have to open a new channel that has $1,000 in capacity, or would you be able to route, like, how would that effectively function?
So today, if this happened today, right, I would have a number of different options for managing this. So I could, if I had other channels, perhaps try a multi-path payments to pay Jessica if she had that service enabled on her wallet, right? If she had that feature enabled. I could just open a new big channel, right, and pay that way. Perhaps it would, if I'm just going to do this one time and I don't want to have that much money on a Lightning Network, it might make more sense just to send that as an on-chain payment, $1,000, right? So there's a number of different ways we could do it. One of them might be open a new $1,000 channel, but likely you would, do some multi-path payment sort of thing, or do it in chunks, right? Pay, and maybe she has a payment plan, because that's a lot of money. But you know what I mean? Like there'd be a number of different ways to handle that. Yeah.
But effectively, you couldn't turn your $100 channel into a $1,000 channel.
Not currently. That might happen in the future. Yeah.
More to be revealed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't that the sort of thing, though, that a wallet might just manage in the background for you, right?
Absolutely.
If you have a smart, good wallet, right, it would just close the smaller channel, open a bigger channel, make the payment, and then potentially close that or not if, you're maintaining the payment.
Yep. Absolutely. The clever wallets will manage that sort of stuff for you. And I'm blown away by the cleverness of some of these wallets and how they handle some stuff like that. Yeah, it's excellent application development. Yeah.
There's a video that, Rodney, you're the one that mentioned it, and Renee Picard, who co-authored the Mastering the Lightning Network book, he has this example of showing how the channels work in terms of payments, like how the routing is and how it can go around. And so he sent me the video that we were talking about, and he actually said that he would create a new one if we wanted. So maybe we can have him do that and update it to explain how some of this can work and how it would, what you would see versus what's actually going on behind the scenes, something like that. But we can put that in the description for YouTube, because I feel like seeing that visual of it, it's got like ping pong balls or something going around on this. I feel like when I saw
Super
them, like,
helpful.
oh yeah. So maybe we'll put the link in this, the description for this video as well. Okay, can we quickly talk about like use cases? Where is this happening right now? I think I've said on a previous stream that there's this restaurant I used to go to when I would go back home to visit family that they accepted Bitcoin, and we were very excited. And then we went and they no longer accepted it. And I thought, I wonder if it has something to do, like, I wonder if people were using Lightning more, if this would be something they would still have or what it would be like. But there are a lot of places that you see using Lightning? Are we still pushing the adoption angle more than we're seeing actually it being used, or what kind of, where are we at with that?
Yeah, so I'll give you my personal theories on how Lightning adoption happens, and then I'll give you some fun examples of how we can use Lightning. So my personal theories on this is what I think will happen is that for all of us that are sitting in nice, comfy first world countries and have like 3 different bank accounts and credit cards and, all this different stuff, like we're probably not going to wind up using Lightning to pay for a lot of meals. I mean, some of us do just because we're crazy enthusiasts, right? Probably our friends and neighbors aren't going to do this a lot anytime real soon, right? So that kind of adoption, I think, will wind up happening in parts of the world that really have money problems. I was learning today about some of the monetary issues in Nigeria, and Argentina is an interesting one. Turkey is a very interesting case. Just the amount of people that are using stable coins in Turkey is like super duper interesting, right? So in those parts of the world where they really like have, we complain about our money and banking, and we should because there are problems, but like this is the best out there, right? So in other parts of the world where they're really feeling the pain, they're not just annoyed by it, right? That's where people might wind up using Lightning to actually buy their meal and this sort of stuff. Then for us, what I think is going to happen is that Lightning gets adopted on the back end of all kinds of really cool applications, right? So I think Lightning will get adopted on the back end of all kinds of apps that you might be running on your phone, right? Cool music apps, like the example that we had. Another fun one here. So that's kind of how I see it happening differently in different parts of the world, right? So then I'll give you some fun examples of Lightning apps that exist now and that I see happening in the future. One of them is a website that I don't think is still up and running, but was super duper fun. And it was one called Poyo Feed. And it was just a very, very silly, but very fun visual like demonstration of just like how global and instant Lightning is and how you can do these tiny transactions. So you would just go to this website, and it is a live stream of some chickens in a little chicken coop, if that's what you call it. I know nothing about chickens, but there are these chickens, right? And if you you press feed chickens, and a Lightning invoice pops up, and you pay, a couple of cents, whatever it was, a tiny little bit, this Lightning payment goes through instantly. And then they have that hooked up to this little machine that drops some food, drops some pellets for the chickens. So you could pay this, push the button, pay the Lightning invoice, pay the chickens, and watch the chickens eat the food you just gave them, right? It was very silly, and it was so much fun to do, right? And because anyone in the world that has a Lightning wallet can do this, right? You don't need a credit card, you don't need an account, you don't need to like wait, you don't need to send in a selfie and a copy of your driver's license, nothing, right? You could just do this, right? So much fun. But some other ones that we see now, sort of the streaming music example is one that exists now. There's an app, I think called Fountain, that allows you to stream artists like as you're listening to their stuff. And also sometimes you can get paid to listen to people's stuff, right? Which is very interesting. So you just get streamed payments for that. There's a lot of gaming apps, right? So my husband has this game called Bitcoin Bounce on his phone. And like, as you get points in the game, like you get Satoshis, right? So it'll just, give it to the kids while we're like waiting at a restaurant and something, they go earn us Satoshis on Bitcoin Bounce, like silly little fun things like that. There are like, imagine a fitness app where when you hit your steps for the day, you get zapped with some Satoshis, right? That's some cool stuff. So those are all things. Cool. Yeah, these are all things that exist today, right? That you can go use and are really fun. And then there's some really interesting stuff that I think we're going to see in like the next year or two, right? And I think we're going to see AI bots really making use of crypto in general, but certainly of Lightning. So you have AI bots going out and buying things for you, or AI bots paying you for some service that you have up and running. Also coming, existing today are stable coins that you can exchange on the Lightning Network, right? So you can imagine AI bots that you can pay in dollars using the dollars or some other stable coin, right? That you can pay on Lightning, right? So you have an AI bot that you're getting services from, or is it paying you or going out and buying things for you, and they're using, a stable coin on the Lightning Network. I think we'll see that soon, right? And so there's all kinds of very, very clever and interesting applications coming to Lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Anita Posh, who was on the CBP committee for a while until she became too busy with her work doing exactly what you're talking about, which is goes to Africa. She was in, I believe, Kenya recently, and teaching people how to use Lightning for payments there, because like you were saying, Hannah, for me, I don't need to use Lightning or Bitcoin. I love it. I think it's important. I want it to be something that's universally adopted, but it doesn't impact my day-to-day life because I don't live in a country where I don't have access to banking. Or I guess I could live in this country and not have access to it, but I do have access to it. So it's not a problem. It's not a problem that I'm currently experiencing, but there are so many who are experiencing this, and Lightning at the grocery store is a great way to be able to make sure that you're not walking there with whatever your currency is and that it's been devalued or changed before the time that you actually make it there. So if you're not familiar with Anita Posh, any of the viewers here, she is Bitcoin for Fairness is her nonprofit, and it's really cool what she's doing to promote the use of Lightning for people who don't have access to financial freedom like we do.
Yeah, she's doing very cool stuff.
I know we're running out of time here, but real quickly, just kind of along those lines, Hannah, what are you seeing as far as like integration with like, point of sale for grocery stores and coffee shops? And yeah, I mean, if I'm going to install that at Dirk's Cafe, what sort of options are out there nowadays?
Yeah, there's so many, but if I'm gonna name drop one, it's definitely going to be BTC Pay Server, if anyone's familiar with that. And that is an open source project, and it does exactly that. And it's all non-custodial, free open source software, really, really cool project. And it has there's a ton of development happening there. It continues to evolve. It's got all the bells and whistles and really cool stuff these days. And yeah, it's awesome. So
sorry, I was just putting that into the chat, the BTC Pay Server link on it.
And I'm bummed that we can't probably do a demo, because I think we're running out of time, and then also I can't share my screen. But I wanted to share with you all a cool UI built by Lightning Labs called Lightning Terminal, where you can connect your node to it, and it lets you have a user interface for managing a Lightning node. So this is people that are properly managing the Lightning node, not so much someone that wants to just, stream some music or buy a cup of coffee, right? This is someone that's managing a Lightning node, but I don't know if you wanted someone to pull it up, I was going to, but it's a really, it provides user interface and liquidity services, some of which we talked about for managing the Lightning node.
What's the URL for that? Is it terminal.lightning?
Terminal.lightning.engineering.
Okay, perfect. I will put that in the chat. Maybe we can do something in the future, Hannah, to actually show how these transactions work, what people are doing and how they set it up and all that stuff. I think that'd be kind of fun to show what it looks
Maybe we
like.
could do like a more visual one too. I could
Yeah.
come prepped with lots of pretty pictures, maybe some animations. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's helpful, but also I think there's something with education as an educator where learning about it, you know, kind of hearing about it, hearing the analogies, it's a good first step. Then you take that next step and you start looking at graphics, but learning something is never a one-stop shop. You always have to start and then build gradually. And then you're like, what the hell did I learn before? And then you circle back to it. And it's kind of like an ongoing, continuous learning thing, especially with technology that is one, difficult to grasp and two, constantly changing.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
almost like that's why C4 exists.
and I do this all
Almost.
day, and sometimes I can't keep up with what's going on out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for joining our committee or two of our committee members and me to talk about Lightning. I really appreciate it. I think it's something that everybody hears about, but really a lot don't understand exactly how it's being used, especially because we hear Bitcoin in the news all the time, but we don't really hear about those use cases and the practical applications of it. And so this was, I think, enlightening and very helpful. And I just appreciate you taking the time. And I think we will take you up on doing a visual one another time.
That would be excellent. I love talking to y'all.
This was great. Well, thank you. And thank you, Dirk and Rodney, for joining. This was excellent. And I guess we'll see you next time.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.